Welcome to the Aging Adventure on KFOR, brought to you by the caring professionals at The Legacy, with 4 state-of-the-art communities here in Lincoln: The Legacy, Legacy Terrace, Legacy Estates, and Legacy Arbors. I'm Dale Johnson, joined by John Kopetsky of Legacy Terrace and longtime friend of Lincoln Seniors, Kathy Blythe. Good morning, John. Good morning, Kathy.
Hi, Dale.
Good morning, Dale.
I ask questions for a living. It's what I do on the radio. But today on the Aging Adventure, I'm the one answering questions from John and Kathy. We'll talk about my motorcycle crash from 6 years ago, how it changed me, but even more importantly, how it did not change me, when the Aging Adventure continues.
Welcome back to the Aging Adventure. I'm John Kopetsky, along with Kathy Blythe, and our special guest today, somebody you're very familiar with, Dale Johnson, a trusted voice and much-loved personality on KFOR since 1985. Now, as he has aged, so have we all together. Dale's Aging Adventure has included some great joys and some difficult challenges, including a catastrophic motorcycle car accident in 2016 that resulted in his left leg being amputated, and it almost took his life. Dale, that 6th anniversary of that life-altering day is coming up, so take us back, if you will, to March 20th, 2016.
I will. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kathy. Before I get started, I want to recall the very first anniversary, the first year after it happened. I believe, Kathy, you called me up. I forgot about the date. I had forgotten about March 20th, 2016 on March 20th, 2017. And I thought that was a pretty good sign that I was healing well, not remembering what happened a year earlier. But it was March 20th. It was the first day of spring, 2016. It was a great day to ride a motorcycle. I had just purchased one 2 weeks earlier, and I wanted to ride it as much as I could in preparation for a trip with my brother to Sturgis in August. So I wanted to put as many miles under me as I could, and I went to the grocery store on 27th Street. Got to Stockwell, traffic stopped. Someone wanted to cross the street and go into the convenience store there. And I noticed a car pulled into the middle lane wanting to turn into that same convenience store, and it was just a few feet beside me. And the person crossed and traffic moved again, and that's the last thing I remember, because the car turned, didn't see me, and a 3,000-pound car went into my 750-pound motorcycle, and I lost that one. I managed to keep it up until I hit the curb and then was thrown over the handlebars and came to rest on grass, the grass between the street and the sidewalk, thank goodness, and just a few feet from a tree. So there were a lot of things that went right with that. Had I landed on concrete, had I hit the curb, had I hit the tree, I would have been in much worse shape. So I remember consciously talking to myself, got to stay awake, got to stay awake. I turned my head to make sure that the 16-year-old that was driving the car hadn't driven off, and he hadn't. And as I was spanning, I could see the sole of my shoe on my left leg, and I knew something was wrong. So I constantly, at that point, kept giving my name, my address, my phone number, Kim, my wife's name, phone number, Blaze, my son, phone number, and then repeated it so that I would stay awake and be helpful for people who now were all around me. And it worked, because someone heard me give my wife's phone number and called her at the moment that the ambulance was whizzing by our house. And on the phone, she hears your husband's been in a motorcycle crash, the emergency crew, and she looks out and here's the ambulance out the kitchen window. And so the last thing I remember getting loaded into the ambulance is the sound of my leather jackets. I was wearing leather jackets riding a bike, and I can remember telling the paramedic, "Don't cut my jackets." And I talked with him later, and he said, no, it was no choice. But the paramedics came from Station 8 at 17th and Van Dorn and Station 4 from 27th and Old Cheney. So 2 units were called out. The one from 27th and Old Cheney got there first. And the paramedic got out of the ambulance, walked over, and before he got to me, he said, "Someone get a tourniquet and put it on his leg." And had he not done that, I found out later from doctors and others, I was 3 minutes from bleeding out. The body holds about 10 units of blood. Ultimately, I needed 23 units to become stable. So in 3 minutes, and 3 minutes is about the amount of time when you pull up to a gas pump, you get out, you pump gas into your car, you put the handle back up and you drive away. That's about 3 minutes. So it's not very long. And that's what happens to most motorcycle victims is they bleed out. They're just injured so badly they can't survive. So I'm taken to Brian into the emergency room, and I use all the blood they have. They have a small little apartment fridge type setup, and I used all the units there. They called for more blood. And I was mistaken. In preparation for our talk, guys, I went back to some notes. Nurse Jackie was the nurse on duty in the ICU at Brian. When I eventually got there, I was in the emergency room for, best I can figure, probably 7 hours. And in that time, there was a point where my wife had to make the decision. She physically had to walk in and see me. The doctor said, we have a choice. We can either try to repair his leg, which was broken in 7 places from the knee to the ankle, or we can amputate. And she wanted to know the advantages of each or the disadvantages. And he said, we can try to find some circulation, but chances are pretty good he will need further operations and he'll have a drop foot. And she said he won't like that. So she made the decision, and it was the right decision, to amputate my left leg. And they did. I went into ICU, and I was in terrible shape. I had a breathing tube down my throat. I had a breathing rate of 6 to 8 per minute. Normally it's twice that. I was on fentanyl. They had to give me Narcan to make sure that I didn't OD on the fentanyl. I had my heart was working so fast in order to pump blood, but yet I had a very low pulse because all the blood was being pumped outside of me. It was all going outside of me. And so that would have been Sunday night. I was in ICU all day Monday, and Nurse Jackie asked if I wanted to see my leg, and I said no. All day Monday I said no. And then Tuesday, there was a point where my wife was at the foot of the bed, and I can remember looking at her, looking at my leg, looking back up at her. She shook her head yes, and then we both started to cry because I knew it was gone. That's the first person I had asked about whether my leg was gone. And it was a moment that I can't forget. I don't want to forget it. But it motivated me once I got over it to really get out of that bed. And then on Tuesday morning, I have notes here that say, I asked the nurses, what can you do to get me out of here? What can you do to get me out of this bed and get me walking? So they brought me a device and they allowed me to go around. They wanted me to go halfway, which would have been a quarter of the way because a quarter there and back. But I wanted to go all the way, which meant I went the entire circumvent of the ICU. And I wanted to go again, and thank goodness the nurse knew better, that I had already been working just in that one trip around ICU and put me back to bed. 11 days in the hospital, 3 months at home on short-term disability, back to work here at KFOR the first day of summer. And after that point, I had other plans that I needed to get ready for in September.
You did have other plans. And do you think, knowing that you had a trip planned to Machu Picchu and you were just bound and determined that you were going to make that trip, do you think that propelled your recovery more than anything possibly could have?
Yeah, I definitely do, Kathy. I can remember, of course, this is summer, so I'm outside, and we lived on a slopey neighborhood, so I would go to the lowest end of the street in a wheelchair, push myself up the hill, not using my foot. I just wanted to use my arms because I knew I had to have shoulder strength and core strength and back strength, and I didn't want my legs to be the strongest point about me. And I would just go up to the top of the hill, turn around, roll back, start my music again in my ears, go back up, and I would do this 5 or 6 times every day, trying to get my arms and core strong enough to be able to go to Machu Picchu in September, which I'll leave listeners hanging. Will tell you, I guess, whether I made it there or not.
And we'll be back with a lot more to come of Dale Johnson's personal story after his accident in 2016. You're listening to The Aging Adventure on KFOR, brought to you by the Legacy Retirement Communities. We'll be right back. Hi, we're back on The Aging Adventure. John Kopetsky and Kathy Blythe interviewing Dale Johnson today about the accident that he was involved in back in 2016, motorcycle car accident that nearly took his life. We're glad that he's here to tell the story, and he's helped so many other people in the process, just as he was helped in the very beginning after the accident, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But first, Dale, you left us hanging before the break, dangling about the goal you had that was going to propel you to getting better faster than anybody could even believe, and that was to go to Peru in September, and your accident had occurred in March. Tell us about that.
So 5.5 months after I was bleeding on the grass at 27th and Stockwell, I'm climbing Inca ruins in Peru, Machu Picchu, one of the 8 wonders of the world. And I don't know, this isn't going to come across egotistical, but it wasn't hard because my mind was so set at making this happen. It was a joy. It wasn't a task, and we walked miles every day. And I'm still getting used to, at the time it was a hydraulic knee, which means I physically had to maneuver it. If I didn't lock it, I would fall. The knee I have now is called a C-leg, which is an amazing product from Ottobock, and it's one of only 60,000 that's been given to amputees around the world. And I have not fallen in years. And it's an amazing way for me to be able to get around because my lifestyle warrants being able to get from point A to point B. But Machu Picchu was great. What it did is it propelled me to come back and was inspiring to the point where we wanted to meet with a 16-year-old who was behind the wheel when he crashed into my motorcycle. Parents were receptive to that. We met at a coffee shop, and he walked in, and you could just see there was tension between us initially. And we finally broke that down, and it got to the point where I leaned over the table to him, and I said, "You hit the right guy." Because I didn't die. I drove here. I'm going to drive home. I've been going to work. I just want you to get some sleep and be a better driver. So, and I haven't seen him since, haven't talked to him since. He is now 22 years old. He was 16 at the time. And I hope he has a great life and has moved beyond it because I have.
Discussing our friend and colleague Dale Johnson's road back from that tragic car motorcycle accident that changed his life forever back in 2016. Dale, I know a lot of people reached out to you. After the accident and during your recovery, can you tell us about some of those encounters?
Yeah, John, I'd be happy to. I often go to a quote, a Korean proverb where it says, "At the end of hardship comes happiness." And Bob Kerrey really instilled that in me. He called me, former governor, former U.S. senator, called me in the hospital. And Bob, of course, an amputee in the Vietnam War as a Navy SEAL. I believe it's his ankle down on one of his legs. And he said, give yourself license to go down the dark spots, to get into the dark spots. Give yourself license because at the other end of that darkness is a bright light and everything will be better. And doggone it if he wasn't right. And just about every time I would find myself in that rabbit hole, in order to get out of it, someone would knock on the door and they'd bring a pie, or there would be cards in the mail, or someone would be mowing my front yard. And truer words there never were. So I would go back to Bob and he said, do not settle. 3 words, do not settle. And he said, you will be asked to settle. You'll be asked by prosthetists, your therapist, your doctors, is this good enough? Are you walking fast enough? Is your gait good enough? And my answers have always been no. I want to get better. The first leg wasn't good enough. I need to have a leg that can... I was faster than my leg. It couldn't keep up with me. And so this other leg allows me to go where I want to go, do what I want to do. And another one is Robert White, who for the longest time was a track coach at Lincoln High. He's retired now. Never forget the first meeting with Bob. I was crossing a street downtown, the first time I had crossed a street with my first knee. And I got into Panera, sat down with Bob, and I said, Bob, you don't know how scared I was to cross the street. And he looked at me and he says, you're here, aren't you? You made it. What's the big deal? And it took the fear away from it. And that man has been, everybody needs a mentor. Everybody needs somebody that they can turn to. And Bob White was mine. What an amazing man. He was in himself in a terrible, terrible crash on the interstate around Christmas time. Maybe people in Lincoln remembered. And he had a far worse set of circumstances than I did. And so Bob White was the man that really kept me motivated to keep going and do more things. Him and Bob Carey, do not settle.
Have you shared that message with other people in the years since?
Yeah, John, I have, and sometimes unintentionally. I'm pumping gas at a station here in town, and a gentleman pulls up with his pickup, and he waves me over, and he said, I saw you walking, and he says, I just want you to know I'm going in Thursday to get my leg amputated because of cancer. He didn't really say disease, but it was an option that he had. And I said, where will it be taken off? Above knee or below knee? And he said, below knee. And I leaned into his pickup and I said, you'll still be able to dance. Mm-hmm. You don't know how lucky you are to have an amputation below the knee, because your life can continue at a pace without having to work at it. I tell people the last thing that you thought of when you got out of bed this morning was walking. It's the first thing I think about every morning is walking. And I had a very brief conversation with him. I said, best of luck. If you want to get a hold of me, you can. And he drove off, and I've never seen him again. Those kinds of things happen to me all the time. And I'm more than happy to share circumstances with people, but I can just tell an amputee will walk in the room, and I can just tell they're not handling it well because of their attitude and their gait and their demeanor. And others just come blowing into the room. Bob White would come blowing into a room, and he'd sit down and he'd become involved. And people can do that, and I understand why it's tough and how it's tough, but it can be done.
Dale, has the pandemic brought about some additional reflections? You've been very philosophical about this since the very beginning, but have things changed? Has your perspective changed? The grandchildren? Talk about that.
My grandchildren have been a big motivating factor because I want to be involved with them every opportunity that I can. And sometimes Blaze is a farmer, and so he has farm equipment, which means you have to climb up on things, you have to traverse things, we have to cut wood. I've learned I run a splitter, those types of things. And I tell Izzy, I say, you will never hear Grandpa say no unless we can figure out that it's not safe. And if it's not safe and we've tried different things, then I'll say, oh, okay, I won't be getting up on the tractor. But we always figure out a way to do it because I want those moments. I don't want to ever, because what happens is if you start saying no, the next time becomes an easier answer. And then the next time's easier. And before you know it, you're watching your grandkids in a chair when you could have been more involved with them. And I've even been on a trampoline. They got a trampoline, the girls did. And I went out, took the leg off. Izzy's even got this type of solution that it takes for me to put my leg back on. So that when I'm done trampolining, she runs in the house, grabs it, and I use it to put my leg back on, and we go in the house and we keep playing.
So the default is, of course I can, unless it can be proven otherwise.
There you go, John. Yeah. Never say no until you can prove that that's the right answer.
Dale, every time I donate blood at the Nebraska Community Blood Bank, I get an email thanking me for the donation, and whose picture is on it but one Dale Johnson. You want to talk about your relationship with the blood bank?
I wasn't a blood donor, I got to be honest with you, but since then I've tried to be one on a regular basis, giving every 8 weeks or so. Come to find out that it really is something that not a lot of people do. 50 people, for example, if you take a look at those 50 people, 20 could give blood. Some can't because of diseases or circumstances, but 20 could, and out of those 20 that could, 2 will. So out of 50 people, 2 people will donate blood. And so they're constantly needing blood. I have fostered such a relationship with the Nebraska Community Blood Bank. What a great organization. Great people doing wonderful work. And if your takeaway message is nothing other than this, just make an appointment. I was in the other day, and I asked them always to time me. It took me 6 minutes and 12 seconds by the time the needle went into my arm until they pulled it out. 6 minutes and 12 seconds to done. It took me longer to fill out the paperwork than it did to actually donate blood. And so you can easily get in and out in an hour, and I highly recommend it.
6 minutes, Dale?
6 minutes, 12 seconds.
5. We'll go in and we'll race next time.
Okay, we will.
Oh, again, our thanks to KFOR News Director Dale Johnson. Such inspiration today, sharing his compelling story. John, tell everybody how to get in touch with the Legacy Retirement Communities.
You can give us a call at 402-436-3000 or online, legacyretirement.com.
This is John Kopetsky, Dale Johnson, and Kathy Blythe thanking you for joining us today on The Aging Adventure, proudly brought to you by Legacy Retirement Communities. Join us next week at 8 right here on KFOR.